Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A very warm welcome to everyone to yet another session of Conversations on Consciousness. This is Nitin Sridhar from Advaita Academy, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Nicholas Kazanas, who was recently awarded Padma Shri by the Government of India. Before I begin, let me start with a small prayer. सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये नमः. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Kazanas. Thank you for agreeing for this interview.
Thank you.
Viewers, just before we begin, just a small introduction, a small bio to Dr. Kazanas. Dr. Kazanas is the director of Omilos Meleton Cultural Institute and in Athens, and he was born in Chios Island in Greece in 1939. He has studied English at University College, Economics and Philosophy at School of Economic Science and Sanskrit at the School of Oriental and African Studies, all in London. He pursued his postgraduate studies, both MA and PhD at SOAS, including 1 year in India, which includes Samskrita Vishwavidyalaya in Varanasi and Deccan College, Pune. He has remained a student follower of his guru, Sri Jagadguru, Sri Shankaracharya Shantananda Saraswati of Jyotirmat. In 1978, he returned to Athens, where he helped establish Omilos Meleton to promote the study of Vedanta and Sanskrit, as there were no such studies in Greece then. To this end, he also wrote a 3-year Sanskrit course and a 30-lecture course on Vedanta. He has also translated the 10 principal Upanishads into Greek, as well as Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and some hymns of Rigveda. He has delivered extensive lectures on yoga, on Upanishads and religion, mythology and philosophy. And his most renowned works are related to the Rigveda and the Aryan immigration, Indo-Aryan indigeneistic view, basically. And since 2000, he has been publishing many articles in peer-reviewed journals in the West and in India on Indology, promoting indigenous view and an early 4th millennium BC date for the Rigveda. And in the last few years, I think he has shifted more his focus more on the philosophy. And he, in 2019, I believe he published his latest book, In the Beginning, and we will be seeing more on this in the conversation. Again, a very warm welcome to you, sir. Thank you for being here today. So my first question is, and yeah, before I begin the question, I want to congratulate you again on receiving the Padma Shri award this year. And when I saw the name, I was very personally happy, since I know you have followed your work for the last many years. So please accept my congratulations as well. So you have studied Indian history and philosophy for a long time. So I want to begin, my first question will be on, can you share about your life journey, especially about your introduction to Indian thought? How did your introduction to Indian thought happen? What created an interest in you to take up study of Sanskrit and Indian history, Rigveda, and philosophy?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to start with. And my greetings to everybody present. It all started with, at some stage, I started studying philosophy, and I came across the Upanishads, naturally, at some stage. And I was quite taken by the Upanishads, the teaching, And I wanted to study the original because there were several translations and there were differences in the translation. And really, if you want to know something, you've got to go to the source. So I was not attending at university, I was working at the time. So I went back to university at the School of Oriental and African Studies to do Sanskrit. And I did. And that's how it all started. I found Sanskrit a magnificent language. Thereafter, there were many developments.
Wonderful, Dr. Kazanas. It was an interest in the Upanishads that led you to take up Sanskrit, and not the interest in Sanskrit that led you to study Upanishads.
Not really, although I did hear about Sanskrit when I was doing comparative philology as part of my English language, but I never followed it up. I knew that somehow one day I would come back to Sanskrit, but I never did until I came across the Upanishads.
You have mentioned that you have been follower, seeker, student of Jagadguru Swami Shantananda Saraswati of Jyotirmat. So, how did your introduction to the Jagadguru happen, and can you share about your interaction with him, your following of his teachings?
Well, my teacher in philosophy in London, he was a student of Guruji, and so for a long time we were getting guidance from him through my teacher. Then I went to Allahabad myself and met him, and I stayed with his teaching until today. In fact, we follow his teaching here. It's practical Vedanta for simple-minded foreigners like myself and my students. I should really say something here, and I am not interested in theories about Vedanta, Advaita, Vishishtadvaita, and so on. I'm not interested in the other darshanas. I'm fully satisfied with Shankara's strict monism, and I'm fully satisfied, in fact, even more, with our Guruji's practical guidance, how to live Vedanta.
Can you share some of the practical guidance that you have received from your Guruji on practical Vedanta?
Well, there are many practices that one employs. The first one is attention. One must attend to what one is doing, whether it's physical work, or whether it is studying, or whether it's speaking like now. One must give attention to what one is doing. One must work swiftly, but not in a hurry, so that one must at all times watch what is being done. That's one practice. The other practice is neti. I am not this, what is under observation. I am not my thoughts. I am not the feelings. I am not whatever is taking place in my psychology at any one moment. This is one of the basic practices that Sri Shankaracharya, the Adi Shankara, demands from the students discrimination between what is passing and what is perpetual, what is unchanging. And many others. Well, of course, we meditate as well.
Mhm. Wonderful, wonderful. Dr. Kazanas, most people, especially in India, are more familiar with your work on Indo-European languages and the allied controversies, that Aryan migration theory, out of India theory, all those things. But however, not many people here are not familiar with your work related to Hindu philosophy, including your translation work of the 10 Upanishads into Greek. So can you share more details about the work you have done in the last many decades on the Rigveda, on the Vedic philosophy, Vedanta, and all these allied issues?
Well, at one stage, just to clarify one point, at one stage, I realized that the Aryan invasion immigration theory had no facts to support it. We were merely repeating what we had learned at university and what we had learned from books. And I began to wonder, because it just didn't tie up. So I came in touch with some other scholars. Subhash Kak is one of them. He's not a Sanskritist, but he's against the AIT. And Danino, Michel Danino, and some others, David Frawley. And gradually I began to study and go deeper into the subject. And I realized that, in fact, all the evidence was against the immigration theory. There was no evidence whatsoever for it, neither archaeological, nor linguistic, nor literary, nor paleoastronomical, and so on. Genetic, of course. So I began to write extensively on the subject. I had debates here in Europe and in the United States. And we had one big debate back in 2003 in the Journal of Indo-European Studies organized it. And I had to meet the attacks of 9 Western scholars who made no sense whatsoever and refused to meet my arguments, going on repeating what they had learned and really making fun as if it was a joke. And they don't realize that, in fact, they have distorted a nation's early history. Anyway, I have published many, many articles. I have taken part in many, many conferences, and I have published 4 books on the subject. I just hope that Indian people, Indian scholars, Indian Sanskritists would take this matter more seriously and study a little bit more and get the hang of it. Actually see the arguments in favor of the Aryan invasion theory and the arguments in favor of indigenism, and then make up their mind, but not to repeat and repeat and repeat. And some of them feel very proud because they corresponded with Professor Witzel or with Professor Johnson or with any professor in the West And they think that that gives them kudos, that gives them fame and so on. Well, it isn't like that. I mean, we should be interested in truth, not, not in what other people say. Well, that's the aspect that took me several years, in fact. You know, there are 12 important items in the Harappan culture. Bricks, cities, large buildings, paved streets, solid immovable altars, and so on. There is cotton, there is wheat, there are special pots with holes in them, and so on. 12 items. The Rigveda knows nothing about these 12 items. It doesn't mention them at all. Now, it's like reading a novel today and not meeting telephones, not meeting television, radio, aeroplanes, steamships, and so on. Well, it wouldn't be a novel of this century. It would be a novel much, much earlier, before these things came about. There are many other arguments in favor of indigenism. I am not saying that Indians were there since the beginning of creation. What I'm saying is that they did not come into India in 1200, 1500, 1700, 2000. They came much, much earlier, possibly in the 8th millennium.
Sir, apart from this, my question was, apart from this, the ongoing debate, which seems never ending, apart from the Aryan invasion, indigenation theory, uh, can you share about the other work on the translations that you did of the Upanishads? And
Well,
yeah.
the translations, I began translating the Upanishads back in the 80s. I did the first two, Isha and Kena, and then I did the Katha. And then I stayed put, I didn't do anything. I translated the Dhammapada as well from Pali, but that's still in handwriting. We've not published that.
Mhm.
And then I started writing a course of Sanskrit, a 3-year course, which we used in our institution. What is there to say about it? Were there difficulties? Yes, there were some difficulties. There were some phrases I wasn't sure about. I asked some of my Indian colleagues and got some help from there. Not much, but sufficient to bring out these volumes. Now we are bringing them out afresh. We're just bringing out a volume of 5 either this at the end of this month or the beginning of next month.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Yes. I have not finished the Chandogya. I've left that deliberately because I think that when I finish that, I shall be quite happy to die because I have fulfilled the aim of my life. So I leave it a bit longer.
Have you finished the Brihadaranyaka?
Yes, that's my favorite.
It's also the, I think, the longest one.
Well, it's a magnificent Upanishad. Yeah.
Your recent book that was published last 2 years back in 2019, In the Beginning, Studies in Vedic and Greek Philosophies. And I think you had written a series of articles for India Facts also on the In the Beginning title as well. I remember publishing that I think 2-3 years back. And you have published quite a lot of papers comparing the philosophy of the Upanishads with Plato's philosophy and such uh, uh, comparative study of the Vedantic philosophy and the Greek philosophy. So
Yes, I have done.
can you share for the benefit of our audience, what are the salient findings of your study? What are the points of convergence and divergence between the philosophies of these two distinct civilizations, the Indian civilization, the Greek civilization? And what made you to take up this project and how you went about?
Well, since I'm Greek and I live in Greece, and Greeks are more interested in their philosophy than anybody else's philosophy, I took an interest in my own philosophy anyway. I used to read Plato quite a lot, not so much Aristotle. And in fact, I wrote a little book on the dialogues of Plato, a comparison of dialogues of Plato and the Upanishads. There have been two publications or three claiming to be a comparison. When I read them, my hair stood on end. There was no comparison whatsoever. In fact, the writers were writing gibberish. So I sat down and took 10 or 12 points and made a comparison, and it was published in Chennai by the Adyar organization. Yes, that was, I liked that very much. I also wrote a paper on Greek philosophy and filled it with notes showing similarities and differences with the Vedic philosophy. I'm not so much interested in Indian philosophy because anymore I'm interested in modern Greek philosophy. I'm not really interested. It's the classics that are interesting. Modern people can't really say anything more useful than what has been said 3,000 or 5,000 years ago. You can't add anything to the Upanishads. Whatever is to be said about man's psychology, man's metaphysics, man's course of life was said, and there's very little to add to that. So I stayed with what I call the Vedic tradition, which is Rigveda, Atharva Veda, Brahmanas, and Upanishads. That doesn't mean that I don't like Sanskrit literature. I love Kalidasa. I think he's a superb poet, both in his plays and in his small epics, Raghuvansha and Kumara Sambhava, and so on. They're beautiful poems, very, very beautiful. And of course, Sanskrit is got such a beautiful sound that you don't find any other poetry having the same quality. You also have the compound, the samasas, which gives a totally different quality to the poetry. And Kalidasa was an expert and a superb poet. So, what are the salient points in Greek and Vedic philosophy? Well, to understand them, you have to make a sharp division. Vedic philosophy knows about unity, the one. Everything comes from that one. This is what is said in many hymns in the Rigveda. This is what is said in the Upanishads. Greek philosophy does not have this quite so clearly. They have the one, they have the many, they have one of the many, but there is no clear relationship between the many and the one. Parmenides did postulate the one, but in one fragmentary poem, we don't have the whole of it. Plato does speak of the one, but not in the same way. There is the creator who creates the universe. Now, in the Vedic philosophy, the universe is not created. It is an emission from the one. To find this, you have to go in Plotinus, who is in the 3rd century, 2nd or 3rd century CE of the current era. Plotinus does have the one and does speak about the emission of the universe and all the worlds and all the creatures from that one. But only Plotinus does this clearly. So this is one great difference. Otherwise, Plato has ideas, and this corresponds to the Karana Sharira of the Vedic tradition, the causal world, where everything is held there in matrikas or ideas or sounds which are products of the Pranava Shabda Om. But in Plato, there is a dualism in the sense that there is the creator and there is the world. And human beings can develop in consciousness and in being and can rise, but they can only reach the stellar world. They cannot go back to the creator. They do not unite with the absolute. They stay 1 or 2 levels below. So this is another difference, an important difference. But then, Katha Upanishad has the chariot. There is this analogy of the chariot with the organs of man, manas, buddhi, atman, the indriyani, and the horses, and the driver, and the master of the chariot. Well, Plato has a similar analogy with the chariot, but there you have 2 horses, one good horse, one bad horse, one good white horse, one bad black horse, and the driver sometimes gets carried away by the black horse because he's not sufficiently strong to have it in control. And there are many other similarities. I mean, we can go on talking about this till the cows come home.
That is true. But it is very interesting to know these the ideas of unity, difference, and the 2 distinct civilizations. On the lines of this, yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Vedic philosophy is adamant about unity. The multiplicity is within that unity and comes from that unity, but it never stays out of the unity. There is one verse in one of the hymns of the Rigveda which says, Ekam patyate vishunam vijatam. One governs the whole, but the verse is so structured that this multiple differentiated whole is at the same time one. This is the one, and it is one that governs all this. It's a beautiful verse. You don't have this closely knit unity and the multiplicity within the unity in the Greek philosophy.
On the lines of this comparative study you have done between Vedic philosophy and Greek philosophy, I think you have also studied, done a comparative study between Advaita and Gnosticism, as well as
Yes.
affinities between Vedic and Egyptian civilization as well, right? Can you share more about that?
Yes, yes, indeed. Do you want me to talk about the Egyptian civilization? I
Yes.
have also done one with the Sumerians, the Mesopotamian civilization. And I came to the conclusion that it is not certain, but it is possible that both civilizations, Mesopotamian and Egyptian, were influenced by the Vedic civilization. I think the Vedic civilization is much, much older. Now, let me clarify one point. I don't consider civilization to be buildings, machines, tools, and that sort of thing. I agree with those who hold that civilization is an inner quality of man. Goodness, justice, consciousness, and connection with the absolute. This makes a civilized man. It's not whether he can use tools or weapons or build skyscrapers. So the Vedic civilization didn't have many tools, didn't have many buildings. They were very, very simple people, but very happy people. Extremely optimistic. It comes out in all the hymns. And they were civilized because they were connected to the source of the universe. We drank Soma. We found the light. We found the gods. We became immortal. How can the malevolence of mortal men hurt us now? I mean, you hear this sort of thing from one rishi after another rishi. Rishi Kanva says, I received the teaching from my father, Medha, the wisdom of Rita, of the natural order of the universe. And I was reborn just like Surya, the god sun, and so on. So I think Vedic civilization is very, very old. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes back to the 6th, 7th, 8th millennium. We just haven't got proof because the tradition there was oral. Writing began around about 3000 as it started in Mesopotamia, but we haven't deciphered yet the Harappan seals, so we don't know what the writing was. There's no evidence of writing in the Rigveda. There's no word for, the word for writing is lipi and lekha. You don't have those words in the Rigveda, and there's no hint of any writing. So it was an oral civilization, an internal civilization. You don't have the same sense in the Mesopotamians and in the Egyptians. The Egyptians do have a high code of ethics, and they have the lotus-born one, as you have it in the Rigveda. One rishi is lotus-born. In the Egyptian civilization, the sun, god Ra, is said to emerge from the lotus in one version. You have similarities of that type. Ra is traveling in the sky in a ship. Now, Pushan, you know your god Pushan, he also travels in the sky in a boat. Now, Pushan is the god of agriculture and fertility, but he's also an aspect of the sun. The fertility aspect of the sun, because without sun, you can't have cultivation. So that aspect of the sun is called Pushan, what causes to grow and mature from push, poshyati.
What commonalities did you find between Advaita and Gnosticism?
Agnosticism is a heresy. The Orthodox Christianity will have nothing to do with Gnosticism. But in fact, to my mind, Orthodox Christianity, Greek Christianity, Roman Catholicism, Protestantism, Methodism, Presbyterianism, and so on and so forth, Baptists and so on, Calvinists, they are the heretics. I, having studied Christianity, the original sources, I'm convinced that it's the Gnostics that have the real teaching, the true teaching of Christ. A gospel was discovered in 1945 and got published in 1949 and then again in 1956. The Gospel of Thomas. It's some sayings of Jesus Christ, 114 sayings, and they are brimming with Vedantic ideas. Pantheism. God is everywhere. Lift a stone, you'll find me there. Clear a piece of wood, I am there. Now, Orthodox Christianity is against pantheism. Although they say God is everywhere, they don't want to accept that God is everywhere and that he's in a stone and in a plant and in metals and in so-called soulless material stuff. They say God is omnipresent, omniscient, but they don't really believe that. They have other dogmas that deny these qualities. But Gnosticism does not accept these basic dogmas. It also accepts reincarnation, samsara. It accepts the fact that everything comes from the Godhead. Not only Jesus, but all human beings come from the Godhead. All human beings can reincarnate and will reincarnate until they refine, purify their essence, and so go back and unite with the source. These are basic facts about this so-called heresy, Gnosticism, which is really the only body of philosophy in the West that approaches Shankara's Vedanta.
Wonderful, wonderful. My next question is more related to, next 2-3 questions are related to Veda and Rigveda. One of the arguments or one of the often repeated narrative regarding the Veda is that we need to understand kind of a uh, this argument is basically rooted in this layer development of Veda or the historical layer development of Veda as it is posited by modern scholarship, and it says that the the development from Rigveda to the Brahmanas to the Upanishads, they actually depict a evolution of thought from a primitive poetry and ritualism to the high philosophy of the Upanishads. But you have taken a consistent position that this is not so, and you have written a lot of the showing how Upanishad philosophy is actually found in Rigveda itself. Can you dispel this very prevalent myth, so to speak, that is created by the modern scholarship?
Well, you know, this is an idea that grew up in the 19th century. In fact, it began in the 18th century. When the British, and before the British, some Dutch and the British also came, it begins from the 17th and around about 1600, Westerners came to India. Well, they came across the so-called castes, the Varnas, the Jatis. So they wondered how this came about. And in the 18th century, they started spinning out theories. Initially, it wasn't the Indo-Europeans that came to India. Initially, it was the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. And they brought in the caste system and imposed it on the native population. This is how it all began. Then this was changed. The linguists came in and they said, it's a linguistic doctrine, Indo-Europeans and so on. And of course, Indians couldn't possibly have a civilization, a high civilization before Greece, because Greece was the light of the world. Greece, then Rome. Then they discovered in the 19th century, they discovered also Egypt. So Egypt also joined in. And since Egypt was 3,000, 2,500 years BCE, well, India couldn't possibly be like that. I mean, they were barbarians. They were atheists, and so on and so forth. It was the European, Eurocentric Christian mindset that began to interpret history and the Vedic literature. So they confined the Vedic literature to 1500 BCE. That's when the Vedic literature began to be produced. And the Rigveda was out around about 1200. And then you had the other Vedas, and then the Brahmanas, and then the Upanishads. And you came to the Mahabharata around about 200 BCE or up to 100 CE. And then you had the classical literature and so on and so forth. So they interpreted the Vedas as poems and hymns of the nomadic people who were not very literate, were not literate at all. Now, observe here another absurdity. You have a people that ride in chariots and horseback. They have a very wealthy literature, the Vedas, and you have a settled people, the native people, the Harappan people, who have writing, but have no literature at all. It's a contradiction, a vast historical contradiction. It's not possible. You can't have literacy and not literature. And you can't have literature of such a scale and such quality and not have writing. Now, the Rigveda hymns contain every single element that you'll find in all the poetry of all the world. There is nothing beautiful in the poetry of all the world that is not already in the Rigveda. So they got satisfied with this. With this interpretation of historical events, and so you have these absurd interpretations and these absurd translations. The Upanishads fared a little better, but the Rigvedic hymns and the Atharva Veda hymns were quite wounded by these translations. Anyway, I hope some young Indians will take up this matter. I am too old now, and really examine from scratch the whole situation. I hope my books will be a help. And so, I mean, take the Nasadiya Sukta. You do know, you've heard of it, and I suppose these people who are listening also have heard of the Nasadiya Sukta. Now, in the very first stanza, the fourth line says, Ambha kimasid gahanam gabhiram. Before that, it is said that there was nothing. There was no existence. No, it doesn't say there was nothing. There was no existence, no non-existence. There was no death, nor immortality. And the second stanza says, there was only that one breathing of its own power, svadhaya, avatam, without air. Other than that, there was nothing else. So if there was nothing else, except that glorious, non-indescribable, that one, how could there be water? They say, Ambah kimasid, was there water? But how could there be water when it is said that there was nothing at all except that one? If there was no death, if there was no day and night, how could there be water? There is nothing in the first three stanzas of that sukta. There is nothing material, nothing at all. Darkness was upon darkness, covered by tuchena, emptiness. Now, how could emptiness cover water? But they translate water, and they go on translating. Then it says about Salila. So they take Salila also. It says it's the ocean. But Salila is not, it's fluid energy. It's quite all right because the dhatu sr means movement, rushing movement. So one needs to, I'm not the only one, there are one or two other Westerners who are highly dissatisfied with mainstream theories. But I hope some Indians, young Indians, will take it up and re-examine all these and start using their brains instead of repeating what Sayana said or what the other scholar said, whether Indian or Western. Actually look at the text afresh. Especially now that the Deccan College is bringing out eventually the big dictionary, the new dictionary. I don't know when it will be ready, but it should be ready in the next 10, 20 years. And then it will be a magnificent tool to approach these ancient hymns and re-examine them again.
I think you have written a paper on the ideas of Upanishad that you found in the Rigveda, the self-realization and the ideas of moksha and all. Can you
Yes,
share
indeed.
more about that as well?
Yes, indeed. Yes, I have written one. Well, I gave a talk last week at the Waves organization in Delhi. And I wrote in 2003, philosophy and self-realization in the Rigveda. And I examined the term philosophy. The term philosophy was used in the Socratic circle around about 400, just before 400 BCE. It was used once or twice by the philosopher Heraclitus. And we hear later on that it's possible that Pythagoras used the term philosopher as well. But both Xenophon and Plato, who were students of Socrates, defined philosophy as a system of knowledge that helps man live an ethical, moral life and return to his former divine estate. This is philosophy. This is how it was understood also by the Stoics, in large part by the Epicureans. But after that, people start using the term philosophy in different senses and applying it to different studies and different things. I mean, you have the philosophy of science. Well, science hasn't got any philosophy. Science has got its nature, it's got its methods, it's got its conclusions, its practices, its experiments. What philosophy? What philosophy can science have? You have the philosophy of the motor bicycle, and so on and so forth. I mean, absurd thing, the philosophy of cooking. So this is one point. But Rigveda speaks constantly about how man can divinize himself, how he can refine, purify his being and rise in being and consciousness, so that he joins the gods and goes beyond the gods to the source of the gods. Now, the gods are not all powerful. They derive their godhood, or there is devatva, and there is asuratva, godhood and lordship. Now, asuratva makes the asuras what they are. I don't mean the demons, I mean the asuras as gods. And devatva, mahad devanam asuratvam ekam. One single and great is the godhood of each god. And each god is God because he partakes of that devatva. The devatva is a condition, a state in that one. And this state is conferred to different forces in the creation and within man. It is said that all the gods are within man. Indra is within man, Agni is within man. Even the absolute is within man, the supreme. In one hymn, it is said ino vishvasya bhuvanasya gopa sa ma sa dhira ma pakam atra avivesha. The almighty shepherd of this entire universe. He has entered into me, the Paka, the simple man, the naive man. So the absolute is within man. And it's just a question of turning one's attention inward through dhyana. Repeatedly the hymns say, the rishis saw the light, came to the gods through while dhyana, while they were reflecting, while they were meditating. This is an important word, an important dhatu, an important verb in the Rigveda, dhi, because it is, you meet it constantly in the hymns. Or they do that through the power in prayer, which is another mode, another manner of reflection and meditation. The girl, Apala, I think she's in the 8th mandala, she goes down by the stream to get some water and she finds soma, the plant, and she takes the soma and bites it. And while biting it, she offers it and masticating it and then ingesting it, she offers it all to Indra and prays to Indra. And her prayer gets realized. She asks that her father gets cured and she becomes a full-grown girl. It's interesting that she starts with her father. She wants her father cured first before she asks anything for herself. Like Nachiketas in the Katha Upanishad, he asks that his father gets forgiven. So there is this moral mode of living and prayer and the ritual, of course, the Soma ritual, the Ashwamedha ritual, the Atiratra ritual, and so on and so forth. But it's not the ritual itself, but the attention given to the ritual. Because if you do the ritual mechanically, nothing comes of it. You have to be present, attend to the ritual. And the Soma ritual has 4 stages externally: the gathering, the pressing, the purifying, and the drinking. But it has 4 stages within, after you've drunk it. It's purification within you. And it is said that it gets purified in the heart. Now, these are all present in the hymns. But surprisingly, nobody pays any attention to that. They are all describing the externals. They do not notice the psychological, internal process. And there are 4 stages of speech, which gets developed later into para, para, pashyanti, madhyama, and vaikari. You have the 4 levels of speech in the first mandala, the 164th hymn by Uchatya. Dirghatamas. It is mentioned and it is said the three upper levels are within, only the fourth level is used by men for communication. The Vaikari. So yes, there is philosophy in the Rigveda. They don't bother about theories. They're not interested in theories. I mean, they are hymns. They are full of joy and worship and love for this creation. They don't waste their time splitting hairs about how the universe started and how what one word means and what another word means and so forth. All these theories that people develop in nowadays, making life complicated, making thought complicated, making emotions complicated, making everything complicated. They were simple people, but very penetrating to the very root of things.
Dr. Kazanas, I remember a few years back, I think you mentioned that the linguists, instead of trying to search and reconstruct Proto-Indo-European as source of language, it would be more useful if they studied the four levels of speech, the Para, Prashanti, Madhyama, and Vaikari.
Oh, yes.
I think you mentioned something like this to me.
Yes, I still maintain that. You know, some meditation on para would be far more useful than all these thousands of pages being written about Indo-European linguistics, which is all rubbish. Old.
Yeah.
I am old. I'm 83 now. I've done my work, most of it. There's still Chandogya Upanishad. But apart from that, so I don't mind speaking my mind and saying exactly what I mean.
One of the uh, other claims of the modern scholarship treatment of Veda is that Veda is the Vedic hymns and other things. They are all merely human creation, merely human poetry. But this view is goes against the Vedic tradition, and which considers Veda as apaurusheya, as of non-human origin, non-human creation. And you have also done a deep study on the question of nityatva and apaurushayatva in language.
Yes, I
So,
have done
how
that.
do you see this? Yes. So, how do you see this entire debate of apaurushayatva of Veda versus Veda as merely human creation? And what was your thesis on the apaurushayatva of the language itself? Can you shed more light on that?
Yes, certainly. If the Supreme, the shepherd of the universe, is within us, then everything must begin with him. Everything must begin with that being, that supreme being. You can't begin anywhere else. But of course, there are different levels. And as the impulse comes, it gets distorted at different levels. But not all people are like that. I mean, those rishis, they could perform miracles. Vishwamitra stopped the rivers flowing. He crossed, his companions crossed, and then the rivers flowed again. Now, that's not something that common people like us can do. It must be a person of a very high level of being and consciousness, which means that his psychology was very pure. and that the force of the Supreme was flowing through without many or serious impediments. So these hymns came from that level. In that sense, they are apaurushaya. But on the other hand, they were paurushaya in the sense that some rishi pronounced them, manifested them, and passed them on to the next generation. And then the next generation passed them on to the next generation. But at some point in time, one rishi conceived this, received this from the Supreme, and then passed it on. So it's both apaurushaya and paurushaya. After all, it's both nityatva and not nityatva, in the sense that they may get forgotten. In fact, the meaning and the purpose has been forgotten. You have got the hymns, but we don't know exactly what the hymns say. So in that sense, something is lost. But if somebody, again, purifies one's being, then he may return to that, by reading these hymns, he may return to that initial state in which they were conceived or received from the higher source. But if we are disconnected from that source, then we make our own languages. And that's what we are doing now. All languages become grosser and grosser and grosser. They lose the versatility, they lose the resiliency, they lose the subtlety that old Vedic had. Now, Vedic had 7 past tenses. Why? Greek had only 2, other languages 1. Now, why 7? We translate, he did this, he smoked this, he ate that. Just 1 past tense, but there are 7. So there must have been a differentiation. There must have been a different nuance of meaning. Now take the dhatus. You have 9 classes, 9 families of dhatus. Bhu, bhavami, ad, admi. Who, juhoti. It goes back to itself and redoubles. Why do they do this? Why all this subtlety, or as it appears to us, complexity? Why not have all of them like bhavami or admi? Or the other one, yuj, yunajmi, yunkte. Now, why do you put an N inside the stem of the dhatu? Tan, tanoti. Why this? Why do you put the O there? Now, all this must have had high significance many thousands of years ago, but they have been forgotten. So, although Sanskrit still remains possibly the most powerful, most poetic, most expressive language in the world, now you want to say, I want to live. I want to live. In Sanskrit, you say, Jiji Vishet. May he want to live. You have this doubling up again. Greek used to have it, but only in one tense. It got lost everywhere else. But Sanskrit has retained it. Okay.
So that was a very, very beautiful exposition on the Sanskrit language and Apaurishativa. I think that is one of the more contentious issues in the modern scholarship. I mean, of course, modern scholarship completely disregards any notion of Apaurishativa. I want to, since we are almost coming towards the conclusion of the session, I want to take 2 or 3 more questions quickly. Can you share with us the activities of the institution, the Omilos Meleton Cultural Institution that you're running from the last few decades? What kind of activities does it undertake?
Well, the main teaching is philosophy, Vedanta, but we embellish it with Christianity, Platonism, Buddhism, the good things that are similar in these religions and in these philosophers. And as I said, we meditate, people meditate, and we apply the principles of Vedanta, the practices that I mentioned earlier on, paying attention, discriminating between the eternal and the fleeting, sharing other people, restraining one's ego, and not expressing anger and fear and jealousy, and all these practices. And we meet in groups every week, and we discuss what we find and develop the teaching. We have periods of group reflection, group study of a particular text, and so on. But
Wonderful.
mostly is lectures which I have written over these years.
Hmm. That is great. Are you currently working on any books? Are there anything you are currently researching and you're bringing out apart from your Chandogya translation that is pending?
Well, I am working on 1 or 2 hymns just now, Rigvedic hymns. I am thinking, but I don't know if I shall do it, of writing a popular book on the Indian indigenism, providing all the evidence for the indigenism. I shall not deal very much with the AIT because it's not worth spending, but I don't know if I shall do it. Anyway, it is in the mind, it has appeared in my mind from Apaurisheya source, so I may do it.
Dr. Kazanas, before ending, I have one audience question which I think you should take up. This is the question from Dimitra Esterer. I hope I pronounced it properly. They want to ask, the question is uh, regarding the issues of unity and multitude in ancient Greek philosophy as opposed to the Vedic one. So the question is, which of your works this could be understood? In which book of yours or books of yours have you written more about this on multiplicity and isolation?
It is in the last book, in the
In the beginning, I believe.
In the beginning, yes. And also in the booklet, this small book, which was published in Chennai, Dialogues of Plato and Upanishads.
Okay. Okay.
I deal there quite a bit on this issue, these comparisons. They are interesting, very interesting. And I must say that I find that the Vedic formulations are somewhat superior to the Greek. From Greek philosophy, the Brahman is missing, and the Atman. You see, in Plato, there is no word for Atman. There is reason, which is the supreme quality of man, but there is no Atman, which is a pity. There is something, I should say this. Plato has written 6 or 7 epistles, letters to friends. In one of them, he says that in his dialogues, he has not put all the teaching that he was teaching in the academy. And that the more important ideas, he says, have not been put in the dialogues. So it's possible that he had this idea and he taught it orally and it never got written down. It's possible, but Aristotle also has no word for self, no word for Atman. There is self, autos, but it hasn't got the quality of the Atman. And the transmigration is a very vague notion. They don't know what it is that transmigrates. They never go into the karma and the sanskara. You know, we have the sanskara inside. They don't have these concepts at all in Greece. So you've got sanchitta, prarabdha, and kriyamana, and all this makes up karma and sanskara. But these concepts are totally absent. Even Chinese Taoism hasn't got it, although Chuang Tzu, who is the chap next to Lao Tzu, writes about Tao more or less like Shankara, but he hasn't got the same vocabulary, he hasn't got the same system. But it's very, very beautiful. And they are monists also, strict monists. Advaita. Incidentally, your organization, where is it stationed?
Our office is in Hyderabad, but we are basically online organized. It's basically an online platform. So we are trying to.
Where are you stationed?
I am stationed in Mysore. It's in Karnataka.
Mysore.
It's very
good to know. Anything more?
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm asking if you have any more questions. I see it's getting on.
Yeah. We are almost out of time now. So I won't be taking any more questions. But it was a wonderful session, Dr. Kazanas, and very enlightening. And and I'm sure all of our audience became more intelligent, have extremely benefited from this session. And hopefully we would be able to hear more from you in the future on our platform as well.
By all means do invite me again. I just want to say one more thing, which I should have said in the
Yes.
beginning, and that's about consciousness. Now, scientists, or some scientists, or some philosophers, they want to study consciousness, and they write books about consciousness. There's nothing to study about consciousness. You cannot study consciousness. Consciousness is studying us. Consciousness is the observer, the ultimate observer. You cannot observe consciousness. You can only be conscious after a lot of spiritual work. That's all.
That your final comments reminded me of the Kena Upanishad, which says the Atman is the eye of the eye, the ear of the ear, the consciousness as the observer. You cannot observe it.
Yes, indeed. Yes. You cannot know the knower of the known. All right.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kazanas, and on
You're
behalf
very
of
much
entire
indeed.
Advaita,
Thank
on the
you.
behalf of in the behalf of entire Advaita Academy and all our viewers, we thank you again. And viewers, with this we come to a conclusion of this session. Stay put and follow us on Twitter and Facebook, Advaita Academy, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can just type in Advaita Academy and you will get our channel. With this, we conclude this session. Shri Guru Pyo Namaha.